This is One Sentence News, a daily podcast featuring 3 news stories with a sentence-long summary and 1 sentence of context apiece. I'm Colin Wright. This is a sponsored message. I've been using Anchor as my podcast host for a while now, and it's been a pleasure to use. Anchor offers benefits that most other hosts do not. It's free to use, but it also has a collection of tools that allow you to create a podcast completely within the Anchor website or smartphone app. They distribute your show to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other distribution channels without any additional effort on your part, and you can make money from your podcast without any minimum audience size. So you can use it as a more traditional podcast host like I do, but it's also got everything you need to start a podcast from scratch. If you're keen to give it a shot, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's Monday, January 16th, 2023. Let's talk about the news. From the Wall Street Journal, thousands of Israelis protest Netanyahu government's judicial overhaul plans. The new government of Israel, which is led by a familiar face, former and once again current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has pledged to overhaul the nation's judicial system, introducing changes that would give the ruling coalition government more say over newly appointed judges, and allowing a simple majority of the government to override the Supreme Court's judgments. This government has been controversial since before they formed their coalition, in part because Netanyahu is currently on trial for corruption charges, and in part because the folks he teamed up with to return to power is made up of far-right groups that have said and done some pretty unpopular things over the years. But this declaration about the court system has even more people up in arms over worries that those in charge might be trying to lock in their power and water down the country's system of checks and balances, which could in turn convert Israel into something like Hungary or Poland, 2 democracies that are largely controlled by authoritarians. From Al Jazeera, Japan and UK sign hugely significant defense deal. Leaders from the United Kingdom and Japan have signed an agreement that could see the 2 countries deploy troops to each other's soil for training and other collaborative purposes. This is mostly notable because it's another indication that Japan is becoming more militarized in the face of an increasingly aggressive China, and that Western powers are doing what they can to build a new, well-bulwarked Pacific coalition to essentially wall China in so that it loses some of its capacity to expand from a regional power into a truly global one. And from Axios, debt ceiling fight looms over Medicare and Medicaid. The U.S. Treasury Department announced last week that the country's statutory debt limit will be reached sometime this week, possibly Thursday, unless that limit is raised by Congress. This is a dance the U.S. Congress does around this time every few years, and depending on who you ask, it's either the consequence of unrestrained spending by the government, or a silly, antiquated practice that few modern governments bother with that nonetheless seems important to the public, because the terms used, like debt and spending, don't mean what they mean in other consumer and business level contexts, which in turn makes this process a useful talking point for politicians. The practical takeaway here, though, is that unless Congress votes to raise the debt ceiling, the government will have to trim back on spending, and that could eventually lead to a default on money it owes, which could in turn lower the country's credit rating and make borrowing money more expensive for the United States in the future. Often the party not in power will use this standoff as a sort of blackmail to get the other side to give them things they want, and it's expected that Republicans, which control the House but not the Senate or presidency, will do exactly that, possibly demanding cuts to funding for things the further right portion of the party does not like, including the social health care programs, Medicare, and Medicaid. If you're finding some value in One Sentence News, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your podcasts and/or sharing the show with a friend. You can find out more about this show or subscribe to the email version at onesentencenews.com, and you can support this and other related projects like the Let's Know Things and Brain Lenses podcasts at understandery.com.